So I finally got to see Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And it's definitely nice to finally catch up with them and take a break from all of Earth's nonsense. It's also really nice to have a good villain for once in Spider-Man's No Way Home. My name is Zon, and welcome to Arzons Archive. Today I'll be going over my thoughts on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. This film is definitely one of the most darker and grittier Marvel films of this year, which I'm really happy with, and I don't think it would have ever been the same without James Gunn directing it. Disney is really going to lose a lot of money letting James Gunn go, but on the other hand, I'm super excited to see his further projects for the DCEU. The fact that James Gunn could make Starro the Conqueror a huge threat in a live-action movie really shows me he knows what he's doing with his craft. I really enjoy how he takes lesser-known characters and makes us really care about them. It really makes his world seem a lot more fleshed out and in-depth than in other movies. Rocket Raccoon carries the majority of the heart and soul throughout this movie, even though most of his scenes are shown in flashbacks. Meanwhile, he's on an operating table like Optimus Prime, while his friends are scrambling around trying to find clues to save his life. Star-Lord does his best to race against time to save his friend, while also dealing with his past after losing Gamora. This gives the movie a fun dynamic between Gamora and Star-Lord because we get to see a different side of Peter, while also seeing Gamora back to her old stabby self again. This movie centers itself on the same themes as it did in the last two movies, honing in on finding a family and building a support structure to help us better overcome our past and find ourselves as we move on in our lives. We did get to see a little bit of this previously between Mantis and Star-Lord because of the holiday special where they considered themselves siblings because of ego, rather than like in Thor Love and Thunder where it was more just a gratuitous cameo since it had to mainly focus on Thor. But at least we got to see goats. Lots of screaming goats. This movie finally allows all the Guardians to shine and also face off against their new biggest threat, the High Evolutionary, who I would say is probably the greatest MCU villain of this year, because Kang honestly was the most disappointing MCU villain I ever saw. It was really surprising to me that he was able to be defeated by Ant-Man of all people in Quantumania. I understand that they're trying to set up a larger, more up-and-coming universe like Thanos, but it really doesn't make sense if he's easily defeated by one hero rather than all of them. I mean, he's supposed to be an Avengers-level threat that they're all going to be brought together, and if Ant-Man could already defeat him, what was the point of him even being a big deal in the first place? A lot of these films really seem like they're just setting up for the next movie rather than actually having a real story. That's really where this movie shines, is that it holds to itself and feels like a more complete trilogy, and it's like its own franchise. Even though this movie is definitely a really good watch, there are still a few things in it that I didn't really enjoy, or I wish could have been more expanded upon, and that mainly stems with Adam Warlock. I really felt like he was very underused and could have had a more fleshed out backstory, and compared to his presence in the comics, I found myself really just feeling like he should have been in another movie rather than this one. Even when we're introduced to him, he doesn't really come off as likable or anything like that. I mean, the first 5 minutes of when he shows up, he's trying to kill Rocket Raccoon, and that's what sets off the main plot of the story. I mean, he's just a bad guy, but then we find out later that he's more like a child, and he was built by the High Evolutionary, but even then he isn't really a threat, he's just kind of there. It's nice that later on he actually joins with them after being rescued by them, but I still really feel like he could have been in his own movie with the Guardians of the Galaxy, and it probably would have been a lot better having that story focused on mostly him, because this movie really is about Rocket more than anything. Something else I really enjoyed about this movie was all the fun cameos that we got to spot, especially the cameo of Nathan Fillion. That was a huge surprise, especially with him being in the Suicide Squad as the detachable kid. His voice was also apparently in the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie, but only as a voice, and he was the guy that Groot shoved his vines up his nose and raised him up into the air. But this is actually the first time we get to see him play as himself, and this is technically what he considers to be his first actual MCU cameo. Nathan Fillion has just always been one of my favorite actors. I really deeply enjoyed him in Firefly and Castle, and he's one of my favorite voices as Green Lantern. Another really great movie with Nathan Fillion cameoing in it is called Super. He plays as a superhero called the Holy Avenger, and he's like this Jesus-themed superhero on this TV show, and it's really hilarious. Or if you're a really long-time Halo fan, you'll know him as the voice of Buck from Halo ODST and Halo 5. We also get to see James Gunn's wife as one of the head security directors of Orgo Corp, along with Daniela Melchior, who played Ratcatcher 2 in the second Suicide Squad film. We even get a really hilarious cameo with James Gunn playing like this deformed creature that Mantis interacts with, along with a brief cameo of Pete Davidson as one of the High Evolutionary's minions. We also see the return of the clerk that Peter tried to sell one of the Infinity Stones to in the first movie, along with Howard the Duck during a poker game with Sean Gunn and Cosmos, who also had a cameo in the first movie, but since the holiday special, she can talk now, and it's really funny and adorable throughout the movie, and she's a really fun character all around. And she is a good dog. It's really nice to see the return of Sylvester Stallone and Michael Rosenbaum as Starhawk and Martin X, along with the return of Mainframe, who was voiced by Tara Strong in this movie, unlike her end credit scene cameo in Guardians of the Galaxy 2, where she was originally voiced by Miley Cyrus. James Gunn really keeps you engaged in this movie with his extremely strong storytelling skills and his outstandingly strong cast. He wraps off all the loose ends in a nice little bow, giving all of his characters a strong send-off that fans will be satisfied with when they leave the theater, which is really surprising because this movie doesn't really feel like an MCU film, which isn't a bad thing. It seems like James Gunn had full control over his project, which really pays off for this movie. This movie really seems like a perfect reflection of James Gunn's experience filming with Disney. I think this is really represented in the High Evolutionary and his vendetta against Rocket. He was so hellbent on creating perfection that he ran out of creativity, and when Rocket showed him something better and more creative than him, he gets angered and resents him rather than letting him help him with his projects.
Coincidence? I think not!
It's really nice to finally see a character who's just straight evil. Not someone who we can relate to, not somebody who we have sympathy for, but someone who's just straight evil. And I honestly believe that the High Evolutionary perfectly embodies all of that and evil, and it's really nice to finally see that in an MCU movie as of this year, and just recently, really. I really feel like having a strong villain really helps carry a movie. I think a really great example of this is Heath Ledger's Joker in The Dark Knight. He wasn't a villain that you could relate to or have sympathy for. He was a villain who just wanted to see the world burn. Not every villain in a movie needs to even have a reason or motivation for why they're evil. Sometimes they can just be a physical manifestation as a character representing that evil. The High Evolutionary is a character that you can hate just as much as the Guardians do. And that's really what I think sells this movie altogether and really gets you invested in the characters a lot deeper, especially with Rocket. This movie is funny when it needs to be, but also just as serious at the same time. We really see this with Rocket at the end when they finally confront the High Evolutionary and they defeat him. It's really emotionally satisfying because Rocket's grown beyond the person that abused him, and he ends up sparing him and growing past it, and that's a lesson that I feel like a lot more superhero movies should really display, and not like how in the Avengers films where they just kill their enemy. Like that's not really the point of being a hero. The point is finding in yourself and rising above yourself. Honing in on the whole moral lesson of accepting your past and being able to grow beyond your hurt to be better than who you were before. And you really feel that in this movie, and I don't think Rocket would have ever been able to rise above that without his friends and without a support system and being able to grow and fight with the Guardians throughout his adventures. And it really pays off in this movie in a fantastic way. I really hope we get to see the High Evolutionary again, because I have a strong feeling they're going to eventually pit him against the Fantastic Four, and that would be really awesome to see how that plays out. I've just been waiting for the Fantastic Four to show up this whole time in general, really, because they're one of my favorite superhero teams, and I've really enjoyed them a lot growing up, especially when I saw the movies from the 2000s. I guess we'll just have to wait and see on that. Not only does this movie have some great emotional development scenes with Rocket and the other Guardians, but there are like a few moments beforehand in the film also that are like have these fake out deaths, and I really feel like that helps add to the effect of when watching this, that you really have no idea what's going to happen to these characters, and you really get distracted by a lot of the visuals that are really spectacular in this film also. This movie isn't afraid to hit hard with its action scenes at the end and its space battles that follow. There's this really fantastic fight scene that's in a hallway at the end, and it's panned out like a really long tracking shot, and it's very visually satisfying and fantastic, and it's one of my favorite parts of the movie. I also really enjoy their new ship called the Bowie, like David Bowie, and it's really cool how it can like separate into multiple ships like a transformer. I thought that was super cool, and I really like what they do with Nowhere. I mean, they literally take the giant head of Nowhere and turn it into a space battle station, and it's really fantastic how they pull it off. It's truly one of the must-see moments of the movie. So all in all, if you ever get the chance to see this movie, either in the theaters or on Disney+, it's definitely something that I highly recommend that you watch. I would definitely give this movie a solid 9 out of 10. And those are my thoughts on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Thank you for watching this video, and if you made it this far, please like and subscribe to Arzons Archive. See you next time.